Alright, listen up, friends. I am not a complicated person with complicated hobbies. If you asked someone to name 3 things I like, they would be totally justified in saying anime, Shakespeare, and Lord of the Rings. So today, I want to talk about the intersection of 2 of these excellent things. No, not anime Romeo and Juliet. Though, it is a good show. It fixes some of the problems I have with the original. Maybe next time. No, today we're going to talk about how JRR Tolkien absolutely freaking hated Shakespeare, and that's why Eowyn is a badass. So let's start by talking about Tolkien. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on January 3rd, 1892. The Hobbit was written in 1937, after he had served in World War I, when Tolkien was 45. The Lord of the Rings was written in stages, the last book being released in 1949, when he was 57. So, for most of his life, Tolkien was not the guy who wrote The Lord of the Rings. Instead, for most of his adult life, Tolkien's claim to fame was his research, translation, and annotation of Beowulf. Yes, the Beowulf that your well-meaning 12th grade English teacher is going to force you to read. You see, Tolkien was a professor of English and literature at Oxford. Fun fact, he had also worked on the Webster Dictionary, specifically on words that began with W with a Germanic origin. Dictionary writing is apparently very specialized. He gave lectures and did research on ancient English literature and language as his specialty. And let me make something clear. As a person who was academically trained in English literature, this ensures 2 things are true about Tolkien. 1, he was a huge nerd. And 2, he had opinions. And yeah, Tolkien hated Shakespeare. Hated him. You see, Tolkien believed that too much time was spent in English literature departments reading and studying Shakespeare. But before you leap to agree with him, know this. It was Tolkien's opinion that a well-rounded student of literature should spend little to no time reading anything more modern than Chaucer. Yeah, the Canterbury Tales Chaucer. That's right, kids. Anything more modern than 1478 was hip, modern dribble unworthy of serious study. Can you imagine what Tolkien would think of modern lit classes these days? Psh! Oh man. But more than that, Tolkien believed that fantasy inherently could not be adequately represented on stage, and that any attempt to do so was fundamentally flawed. And this is where I point out that there are several stage adaptations of Lord of the Rings, including a musical version, all of which are pretty bad, and all of which I am sure Tolkien would have hated. Tolkien also took objection to Shakespeare drawing on Greek and Anglo-Saxon inspirations for his fairies and elves, rather than what Tolkien saw as a more refined and authentic source, Norse and Celtic traditions. Tolkien looked at Shakespeare's elves and fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and he felt that these corrupt, diminutive depictions of elves were horrible. They weren't real elves. They didn't act the way real elves should act. Like I said, the man had opinions. Strong opinions about elves, among other things. And that brings me to Macbeth. Set aside Tolkien for a moment while we go into some backstory about the Scottish play. Macbeth is arguably Shakespeare's bloodiest tragedy. First performed in 1606, well after our Tolkien-approved literary cutoff of the 1470s, it follows the story of the well-respected general Macbeth. One day, on the road, he comes across a trio of witches who give him a prophecy. Invoking the Greek tradition of the 3 fates and Greek prophecy, this premonition is destined to be true. They tell Macbeth that he will be the king. Macbeth relays this information to his wife, Lady Macbeth, who basically bullies him into regicide and murder so that he can, in fact, become king. She tells him that she's more of a man than he is because he's pussyfooting around multiple premeditated murders of friends and allies. Macbeth goes through with these murders, and Lady Macbeth eventually kills herself out of the regret and guilt, so oops on that one. In the midst of all this killing and mayhem, Macbeth seeks out the witches once again and asks them for more prophecy. Will he remain king? Will he be deposed as he deposed the last king? So they give him 3 prophecies. First, they tell him to beware his rival Macduff. Second, they tell him that no man born of a woman will kill him. Third, they tell him that he will be safe until the great Birnam Wood comes to the castle. He feels pretty safe after hearing this, since 2 of these 3 things seem pretty impossible. All men are born from women, and forests don't generally go walking around, he reasons. In the end, just as with all prophecy, these things do come true anyway. Kind of. Macduff reveals that he was born via C-section, which apparently counts as not being born from a woman. And a whole bunch of soldiers use branches from the Birnam Forest to disguise themselves as they march on the castle. Macbeth is killed, and thus the tragedy for lust and power and greed has this tragic end. Now, despite your English teacher's most persuasive arguments, your future does not ultimately hinge on your ability to read and appreciate Macbeth. It will help you understand all of the allusions and hocus pocus, and will probably strengthen your, general reading comprehension and cultural awareness, but you won't die without it. And Tolkien hated Macbeth. He hated it. Specifically, he really took issue with what he felt was a cop-out on the final 2 prophecies. He felt that the loopholes about the C-section and the camouflage cheated the audience, and he was not having it. So, Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's excuse to write entire languages and genealogical histories with a loose thread of plot to move from one intense exploration of some odd bit of lore to another. Along with satisfying his need to write a new mythology for England and be the world's biggest linguistics nerd, Tolkien was also able to address and ultimately fix what he saw as these flaws in Macbeth. The first is the prophecy about Birnam Forest marching on the castle. Rather than have the bullshit loophole about normal, everyday soldiers using branches as camouflage, Tolkien looked that plot point in the eye and declared Ents. Living, walking, actual tree people. Screw Shakespeare and the limitations of the stage. He could actually have a forest rise up and march on a fortress if he damn well wanted to. And so he did, and the Ents attack Sauron's tower in a stunning fashion, and the man inside the tower, corrupted by a lust for power, is defeated. Next, and ultimately coolest, is Eowyn, specifically Eowyn's duel with the Witch King. Take a minute and picture that scene in Return of the King. The Witch King stands over Eowyn on the battlefield, all confidence and radiating evil, and he declares, "No man can kill me." The Witch King is also Macbeth, a human king driven to acts of evil by his lust for power. In Macbeth, the "no man born of a woman can kill me" is solved by C-section apparently not counting as being born, and Tolkien looked that plot point dead in the face and threw Eowyn at it. She is no man. She, a woman, breaks that prophecy in a much, much more satisfying and less bullshitty way than any C-section ever could. And she does it with a sword and an armor and looking like a badass. So yes, that's how Tolkien wrote one of the greatest scenes in modern fantasy just to pick a fight with William Shakespeare. Bonus fact, years later, C.S. Lewis would similarly pick a fight with Tolkien because Tolkien had said that electric lamps have no place in fantasy. C.S. Lewis responded by putting a damn lamppost in the middle of Narnia just to mess with him. In summary, authors are petty, and I love them. So yes, thank you for watching this video. This channel is still really new, so I always appreciate comments and likes. I'll be sure to see all of y'all down in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed listening to this queer millennial feminist with a BA in English ramble about stuff I like for a while, feel free to subscribe.